Hey, man, thanks for the booster seat. I appreciate it. Makes things nice in here in the closet.
I know, right? All of a sudden, it's got a Kung Fu closet upgrade. I let you borrow my office chair. So
fancy.
I know. It's good times.
Fancy. How are you, man? How's life? How's training? How's the whatnot?
It's good. 2023. Busy.
Wow, we are here, aren't we?
Yeah, right out of the gate. Boom. I think this is our first one this year.
This is our first one this year.
There you go.
But we got some good stuff in the bag still. We've got part 2 of our friend Ryan Bloomfield coming out, and then we've got a really exciting episode. We're not going to drop a name, but
nope.
If you let me just give a hint. If you like to throw people, you're going to want to hear this next episode.
You're going to want to hear it.
Yeah. So we've got an interesting topic today. Should we just get right back into it, or what do you think?
Yeah, well, let's talk about our Kung Fu Conversations email. It's kungfuconversations@gmail.com if you want to give us any, feedback, threats. We love any kind of feedback people are going to give us about the show.
Nobody's threatened us yet, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I'm just teasing.
Honestly, I'm the only one that gets it. It's like,
or you can reach out on
Instagram. That's KF Conversations. Mm-hmm. And I'm the one that's manning that, as well as our Facebook page. You can find us on Facebook under Kung Fu Conversations.
Mm-hmm. Or YouTube. We actually have been putting up our more recent episodes on YouTube.
We're getting a lot more audience with the YouTube. We're expanding the audience, which is really cool.
Yeah, and YouTube's got a little. It's got some better reach. It reaches into some places where there's not as much. There may not be as much accessibility in terms of Instagram or some social media platforms. So that's very cool.
If you're listening to us on YouTube and you're part of the forums or the Facebook forums or anything like that, and you're really liking one of the episodes, please feel free to share and post it with others if you think that they can get something out of that.
Yeah.
Please do. So we also have our page up on Teespring. I'm still working on that, but you can still find the link on our Instagram page. Mm-hmm. It's Kung Fu Conversations Podcast. And we've got a great design that was made by our friend Spencer, Goji Spencer. So we want to thank him for that.
Yep, thank you, Spencer.
We can also find us on Buy Me a Coffee at Kung Fu Kong Pod. Kung Fu Con Pod, which sounds like a villain of Captain Kirk back in the original Star Trek. And if you feel like coming and training with us, where are you and what's your name? And I'm talking to you, Mr.
Yeah,
Owen.
man. My name is Owen Schilling, and I teach and train in Boulder, Colorado.
What are you teaching?
Bagua, Shingi.
Yeah.
Yep.
But you get arts.
Yeah. That other art, we don't talk about that.
Yeah. But. And then where could they find you on the web? Don't you have a blog spot?
Yeah, I do. And you can get a hold of me through that, or so I have a Facebook page, or I also have an Instagram page, and it's all Boulder Internal Arts.
And I'm Randall Davis. You can find me here in Longmont, which is right outside of Boulder. Yeah, I can travel to if it's in state.
Here in Colorado?
Yeah, absolutely. Red Forest Chinese Boxing. As a matter of fact, the first weekend in February, I am doing a small introduction Saturday and Sunday to Wing Chun. And I will be teaching down at 5280 Shaolin, which is also known as Denver Shaolin and Tai Chi off of Parker Road. And for the 2-day seminar, should be about 8 to 10 hours. I'm only charging, if you make both days, $45.
That's a steal.
Or if you come in wearing one of our Kung Fu Conversations t-shirts, I'm only going to charge you for 1 day, which is $25.
Boom.
So there you go. So that's who we are, what we're doing. And we're going to talk today about some Kung Fu stuff. And so it's just an observation. I noticed a lot of the Chinese arts try to tie their roots or origin story. Sometimes it'll be, a mythological person or somebody historically of great importance, like Xing Yi being tied to Yue. Or Yufei, if however you pronounce it. Yep, and what Eagle Claw, I think, has him as the creator as well. Yep. I think there's one other art too. There's It's been said that Ing Moy created Wing Chun.
Mm-hmm. Or Bai Mei created
all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, Ing Moy is actually supposed to be the creator of the dragon style too.
Huh.
And she also apparently designed a style called Plum Flower Fist, which is a big symbol in the Wing Chun origins. But the other thing that a lot of the Chinese...
You forgot Cheng Sen Fong.
Cheng Sung Fong?
Cheng Sen Fong, he created Taiji. Watching this fight between the crane and the snake. Yeah.
And the snake. Who did the tortoise and the snake? Who was that one? Was that like the Wudon arts? I think.
Yeah, that's those two animals are sort of associated with them.
Tortoises and cranes are the same thing. Yeah. Maybe that's a reach for me. But what I find it fascinating is, if it's not a historical figure, if it's not somebody that's mythological or magical, then it is Wudon, the mountain where a lot of the Taoists practice, or Shaolin, which is where the Chan Buddhists practice. So I had a weird thought pop into my head. A majority of our listeners are Westerners. And a majority of our listeners work a 9-to-5 job, just like you and I do.
Mm-hmm.
So why are we training arts to come from a monastic background or a monastery? I'm going to give a hypothetical because I do not train at Shaolin, but let's give a hypothetical. Let's say a few hundred years ago at Shaolin Temple, you went to be a Shaolin monk to learn their martial art, but also Chan Buddhism. You probably would practice your martial arts half the day and then read and write, chant, recite the sutras. And then you had whatever your job was. Maybe you're part of the construction crew, part of, food, preparing the meals, the bedding, the cleaning, all these other things that, would entail your daily life. On a really good day, like usually Saturdays or Sundays when I have those off, I have 4 hours to train Kung Fu.
Mm-hmm.
Some days when I'm working, I might only have half an hour. I've got a new good schedule. I'm really appreciating this one. I'm very happy to have it. It's taken me damn near 13 years to get a schedule where I can do this. Like today, I'm going to train for an hour, and then I'm going to take a nap. And then tomorrow, I get to train for a good 4 hours, and then I have 5 hours of driving. Sunday, I'm going to train for a good long time because I'm getting ready for the seminar, and I'm going to go over stuff that I'm going to do for the seminar. But people that don't have 4 hours to train a day, because I don't do that every day, I just don't have the time because I have to cook, clean, do my job. Why are we basing our training off of people that are living the monastic lifestyle?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think that, my understanding is that not everybody at Shaolin was a warrior monk, right? So then you end up with like, okay, well, these guys are creating infrastructure to support the people who are maybe training more during the day. I think that, everybody had probably some exposure on some level to martial arts just because
or the Qigong or Neigong practice to help with their
health and to keep
the
them
chanting,
healthy,
all that stuff. Yeah.
But I think as I zoom out on this topic, I think that there's a tendency to assign, how do I say it? I think that there's a tendency to assign meaning from the glorious past, right?
Sure.
So we've got this idea that like
it was better back then.
Sure, and there was something special. There was something special happening back then, and it was sort of mystical or unknown or powerful in some way, and I think that takes place everywhere. I think people mythologize their past. And I know the Chinese do it. I mean, we as Americans, we for sure do it. We haven't even been around that long.
The Old West.
But yeah, they were the 1950s.
Yeah, totally. The Roaring 20s.
Sure. It's like just like these time frames where, things.
It was better back then.
Yeah. Was it? Yeah.
Well, that's the
well, that's what they're selling.
Cholera and dysentery back then too, didn't they?
Yeah. A lot of polio.
No running water.
Yeah, and this wasn't. Yeah, but it was better. So, I think that's in terms of this conversation, I think that's kind of my starting place. Is it's like I want to take a step back and look at it and say, well, was it better even in China? Were these monks who were practicing, all day or part of the day and spending their lives sort of dedicating themselves to these arts? Was it the fact that they had this schedule and routine? Was that routine responsible for them getting better? Did you have just a set of talented individuals who really shined? There's so much like history, right? And I think a lot of that history is like, oh, we're going to bend it or tweak it or rewrite it or, mythologize it to make it this thing. And I think this is just me sort of talking out loud, but I think people in the West are very sort of taken by that to a certain extent. And I also think just from a historical perspective, I think Europeans are taken sort of by their history because their history is so much longer than, say, here for us as Americans. But to get back on topic, yes, I think that having the idea that this is what created their mystical, powerful kung fu is probably a mistake.
Sure. You can look at it too as in, I'm also looking at the whole equation as being occupation and time management.
Yep.
Okay. So guess what? Even when Shaolin Temple was up and running, maybe 200 or 300 years ago, we know it's much older than that. We know that they've trained much longer than that. But we're just going to go back 200 or 300 years. Guess what else there was? There were people with 9-to-5s back then too, right? In the Chinese community that also practiced martial arts. Mm-hmm. That probably had no association with Shaolin Temple, but might have been very effective for either self-defense or maybe a little bit like we always mention Li Sun Yi and his boys, running a caravan, like being bodyguards, and so that becomes your livelihood. Do they have 4 hours to train a day? Probably not. They might have a couple hours here and there, and it's going to be a part of their daily routine because it's their job.
Right.
It not only puts food on the table, but it might keep their head on their necks. Mm-hmm. And so that is super important. Yeah. So even in a time when Shaolin and Wudang were in their heydays as being martial meccas, if you will, and that's another thing too, is a lot of their arts were not just for self-defense or fighting. And they will tell you that now. Even whether you believe that Shaolin and Wudang these days are full of actors and acrobats, that really doesn't matter to me. But they will tell you also, even today, even from the past, that a lot of their art is also for self-enlightenment, self-development. So it's not just for fighting, but it helps move them along in stages of their practice of their faith. Mm. And I think that that's something that maybe we forget about in the West when we look at, can that Shaolin monk beat this MMA guy? Who gives a shit? Does his practice help develop him as a better Chan Buddhist? Maybe it might be a better question. Mm. Does it help him in his faith? You were talking about the Shaolin and having other occupations. I think of Wudang too. You got the black hats, you got the red hats and different sectors and factions and all these other things. But a lot of those guys, they're not going to practice martial arts that much because they have obligations to the community. Mm. Funerals, weddings, New Year's, lunar calendar dates, all these different things that they have to be out there preparing all these festivals and things like that for the community. So a lot, and same with Shaolin, they are active members of the community. They are not just monks on the hill. Mm-hmm. They have stuff to do that deals with the people around the area. Mm-hmm. So I think that gets left out quite a bit also in the looking at of these sacred temples.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And just I think that you got to figure that I know Shaolin in particular is like 1,500 years old.
Sure.
How much of this routine, how much of what we think of as Shaolin Temple, what time frame was it from? I mean, they didn't always do martial arts at Shaolin, right?
Sure.
There's a whole story. You can call it propaganda if you want, of Bodhidharma. He came over the Himalayas from India. He taught the monks how to do. Some people say he taught them how to do kung fu. Some people say that he just taught them how to do yoga or like qigong or neigong or whatever it was. He taught them how to do something, right? And then he sat in the cave,
cut his arm off, looked at the wall.
Yeah, he was looking at the wall. So, it's kind of like you have to take a step back again and like go, okay, well, how much of this is myth? How much of it was talent? How much of it is good instruction, right? I mean, maybe at Shaolin Temple, the reason they got so good is, they had an opportunity to practice for sure, but maybe they had some really top-notch instructors, and then they had a bunch of talented students who kind of didn't have anything else to do. It's like, oh, well, you can go tend the gardens, or you can go clean the latrine, or you can, you can
go learn some kung fu with Uncle Ned.
Yeah.
I'll be hanging out with Uncle Ned learning the kung fu.
Exactly.
Get someone else to clean the latrines.
Yep, exactly. So it's like, wow, that actually sounds. I mean, not that was any like picnic. In
oh no,
physical
absolutely
effort, right?
not.
But it may have been the lesser of two evils. I don't know. I'm not sure what the process was for them to decide who was going to become a martial monk. But it's interesting that, and I wonder. I was just sitting here thinking, like, I wonder if a lot of what we sort of mythologize as, like, Shaolin or Wudong comes from the kung fu movies.
Comes
from the
Shaw
Shaw Brothers
before.
Golden
Harvest and Shaw Brothers.
Yeah.
It's maybe the lens that we're looking at is less than 100 years old.
Sure. Maybe it never existed. Maybe they just kind of made it up for the most part, because, I mean, at the point when they were making those movies in Hong Kong belonged to the Brits.
Sure.
Right? And the mainland, for the most part, was pretty cut off. So you had a lot of people who had fled from the north, who were northern Chinese people who were doing kung fu, and they were doing it in Hong Kong and in that area for sure. There was boatloads of those people. And they probably had a feel for what their lineage stories about their training and about Shaolin Temple and about how those old monks trained.
It's fascinating. You're talking about the lineage stories and stuff like that. I started recently listening to, and it's a term that we're going to definitely use at some point in this episode, so might as well use it now. It's a little podcast called Secular Buddhism, and I started it. There's like 180 episodes out, or maybe there's over 200. But I started in 2015 with this first episode, and I've really enjoyed every episode since then. And it was in the first or second episode, it reminded me of one of our old episodes. I had mentioned that, if Herman Melville had written Moby Dick in China 450 years ago, it might be seen as a history because the lesson of Ahab, not only putting his life in jeopardy, but the life of his crew. And everyone went down with him because of him and his madness. Mm-hmm. There's a lesson to be taught there. And Noah, the host, he talks about this too. He's like, are you looking at these stories as truth and fact? Or as factual or truth? Because there can be a difference between the two.
Sure.
You can learn the lesson from the truth of the story, but it doesn't have to be 100% fact. And I really think that we have to look at that when it comes to not only the Chinese history of our arts, but how they're presented.
Yeah.
How much of it is truth? Mm-hmm. How much can we learn from it? But how much of it is fact? And does it need to be factual? Sure. It's being passed on from a culture that is not ours. But that doesn't mean we can't learn something from that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And moreover, I think that my understanding is the Chinese mindset wasn't necessarily concerned with fact. It's not like, in the West, we're very concerned with, well, is this the truth? Is this factual?
Recorded history.
Exactly. And my understanding is the Chinese didn't view things that way. And the Europeans didn't view things that way, early on in their development either. So this idea that we're using it now, like, oh yes, Cheng Sun Fong created Tai Chi.
We don't even know if he was alive.
We don't, nobody. Nope, there's like pretty much zero factual anything to prove that he was a real person.
But that doesn't mean that Tai Chi is not awesome.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that you can't find good qualified Tai Chi instructors. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that Tai Chi can't be beneficial for you or to help develop a community. Mm-hmm. So,
and I was going to say that, and to go back to your point, it doesn't mean that there isn't some truth that can be extrapolated from the stories about Cheng Sin Fong, right? That there may be some wisdom there in terms of practicing your art that can be useful in terms about, balance or, movement or any of those things. And I think every art kind of has those stories, but it doesn't need to be fact.
So I study the Xingyi from you and am dabbling still in the Bagua from you. I'm still in my infantile stages on that. And then I've been practicing the Wing Chun for a good long time. And these days, I mention this quite a bit, and I'll mention it on the show probably forever, is I feel very martially capable. But I practice these for more than just a martial. And I found balance in heart and mindset, as well as moving in planes of motion that I would never do on an everyday scale. And because of that, I can keep my 9-to-5 job, my bus driving, and I don't have lower back problems. My hips are still in good check. My shoulders are okay. And so I have a way to be a better person at my work. But I also have a way to find balance and training in my mind and my heart. And I can be a better Randel for my friends and family around me. So maybe I'm not a Buddhist monk at Shaolin Temple 350 years ago. Maybe I'm not a Wudang warrior at Mount Wudang 350 years ago. Or maybe even Omei, at the third mountain, the ASICs, if you will, of our Nike and our Reebok mountains. But I can take ancient Chinese Kung Fu and practice it and have something that I can work on. And I can work on myself as a human being. Forget the mysticism. I want it to be practical. I want to be able to defend myself with it. I want it to help me on a physical scale, change my body and keep in shape enough that I can do my job, or I can help somebody move some furniture, or, everyday life. That is so much more beneficial than being a mystic away from everybody.